On July 20th, 1969, the world held its breath. An estimated 650 million people were glued to their television and radio sets, a global audience united by a single, audacious human endeavor. They waited for confirmation that a fragile craft, the Eagle lunar module, had safely touched down on the surface of the moon. In our timeline, that confirmation came, followed by the iconic words of Neil Armstrong, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." This singular achievement became a defining moment of the 20th century, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. Now, let us rewind the tape of history. Let us imagine a reality where that broadcast ended differently, with static, with a catastrophic failure, or perhaps with a quiet announcement of a mission scrubbed just moments before its climax. This essay explores that alternate timeline. It is a journey into a world where the Apollo 11 mission did not succeed. This is not merely an academic exercise in what-if scenarios. It is a profound examination of how a single event, lasting just a few hours, shaped the trajectory of global politics, technological progress, and even our collective cultural identity. The absence of Armstrong's footprint on the lunar dust would have created a vacuum, not just in space, but here on Earth. In the grand theater of the Cold War, the space race was the most visible and awe-inspiring competition. The Soviet Union had dominated the opening acts. They launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, in 1957, a small beeping orb that rattled American confidence. First, the animal in orbit, Laika. First, the man in space, Yuri Gagarin. First, the woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova. These weren't just technical wins. They were propaganda victories showcasing the supposed superiority of the communist system. The United States, playing catch-up, desperately needed a win. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy threw down the gauntlet demanding a moon landing before the decade was out. This was America's all-or-nothing bet. Now imagine an American failure on the lunar stage. By accident or by a technical abort, the message would be clear. America had tried and failed. That failure would leave the door wide open for the Soviet Union. Their N-1L-3 crewed lunar program was secretive and plagued by catastrophic launches, yet the Soviets kept pushing. An Apollo 11 failure would have given them a crucial window. Had they landed a cosmonaut in 1970 or in 1971, the space race narrative would be sealed. The failure of Apollo 11 would have sent shockwaves directly into the heart of American society and politics. The 1960s were already a decade of profound turmoil in the United States. The nation was grappling with the deeply divisive Vietnam War, the struggle for civil rights, a growing counterculture movement that questioned traditional authority. The moon landing was a rare, unifying moment of national pride and purpose. It was a shining example of what America could achieve when it was at its best. Taking that moment away would have deepened the existing fissures in the national consciousness. Instead of a celebration, July 1969 would have become a day of national mourning and recrimination. The failure would have been a symbol of a nation that had lost its way, unable to fulfill its own bold promises. The political fallout for the administration of President Richard Nixon, who had only been in office for 6 months, would have been immense. The Apollo program was a legacy of his predecessors Kennedy Johnson, but the failure would have happened on his watch. The Apollo program was one of the greatest engines of technological innovation in human history. To solve the monumental challenge of sending humans to the moon and bringing them back safely, NASA and its contractors had to invent perfect miniaturize a breathtaking array of new technologies. These advancements did not remain confined to the vacuum of space. They spilled over into almost every sector of the economy, creating spin-offs that reshaped modern life. A failure of the Apollo program would have left a significant void in our technological timeline. Many of the innovations we take for granted might have been delayed by years or decades. One critical area was computing. The Apollo Guidance Computer, the AGC, was a marvel. It was among the first to use integrated circuits. Apollo's demand for small, reliable ICs kick-started the semiconductor industry. That demand helped drive down costs and speed microchip development. Without that urgency, the move from bulky transistors to integrated circuits would have been slower. The personal computer revolution of the late 70s and 80s might have been postponed. Beyond computing, Apollo spurred breakthroughs across many fields. Fireproof textiles after the Apollo 1 fire became modern firefighting gear. In the 1960s, NASA was more than just a government agency. It was a symbol of American excellence and future-oriented ambition. Its budget swelled to an incredible peak, consuming over 4% of the entire federal budget at the height of the Apollo program. This massive influx of resources attracted the brightest scientific engineering minds, creating a powerhouse of innovation. A successful moon landing was the ultimate justification for this enormous expenditure. It validated the agency's mission and secured its place in the public imagination. A failure, however, would have had the opposite effect. It would have led to a brutal and immediate reckoning for NASA, from which it might never have fully recovered. In the aftermath of a failed Apollo 11 mission, congressional investigations would have been swift and merciless. The agency would have been accused of mismanagement hubris, wasting taxpayer money on an impossible dream. Its budget would have been slashed not by a small percentage, but by a catastrophic amount. The political will to fund ambitious human spaceflight missions would have completely dissolved. The remaining Apollo missions would have been canceled immediately. The moon landing on July 20th, 1969, was a profoundly unifying global event. For a brief moment, political divisions and national rivalries seemed to melt away as humanity collectively gazed at its television screens in wonder. The message was one of hope, achievement, and shared destiny. Neil Armstrong's words, speaking of a giant leap for mankind, resonated across the planet. That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. It fostered a sense of possibility, a belief that humanity could overcome immense challenges through cooperation, science, sheer determination. This event became a cultural touchstone, a shared memory for an entire generation that reinforced a narrative of progress and limitless potential. The absence of this moment would have left a noticeable void in the collective human psyche. Without the uplifting spectacle of the moon landing, the dominant cultural mood of the late 1960s and early 1970s would have been much darker. The global consciousness was already saturated with images of the Vietnam War, student protests, political assassinations, and social unrest. An Apollo failure would have been another major entry in this litany of bad news, reinforcing a growing sense of pessimism and disillusionment. The idea that big, audacious goals were achievable would have been replaced by a more cynical and cautious worldview. For the leadership of the Soviet Union, an American failure to reach the moon would have been a moment of immense political vindication. The Cold War was an ideological struggle between two competing systems. Each side sought to prove its model was superior. The space race was the most public, dramatic arena for this contest. After early victories with Sputnik and Gagarin, the Soviets watched with growing anxiety as the American Apollo program gathered momentum. An American failure would have been celebrated in the Kremlin as not just a technical setback, but as an ideological triumph. The propaganda value would have been immeasurable. Pravda, Radio Moscow. The narrative would be the decadent, chaotic capitalist system had overreached and failed, while the disciplined, scientific socialist system was poised for victory. The message would be trumpeted to the Eastern Bloc, to client states in the developing world, and even beamed behind the Iron Curtain to their own populace. The failure would be presented as proof of communism's inevitable triumph, a Marxist-Leninist tenet. A Soviet moon landing after an American failure would boost USSR international standing. Soviet diplomats would have a powerful new bargaining chip. They could offer space technology to win allies and cement ties. Nations in the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia might shift toward Moscow. In the end, the story of Apollo 11 is the story of a promise fulfilled. It was a singular moment in history. A nation, and indeed the world, was captivated by a single audacious goal: the successful landing on the moon on July 20th, 1969. It was far more than a political victory in the Cold War, a profound affirmation of human capability, a catalyst for technological revolution, a source of global inspiration that shaped the decades that followed. To imagine a world where that landing failed, the 20th century taking a sharp, divergent turn onto a more uncertain and less optimistic path. The absence of that one small step would have created a giant void. Without Apollo's triumph, the space race would likely have been won by the Soviet Union. fundamentally altering the geopolitical balance of the Cold War, diminishing American prestige for a generation. The technological boom fueled by Apollo would have been significantly slowed. Microchips, medical monitors, delaying the arrival of the modern digital age. NASA would have been crippled, its budget slashed, its ambitions curtailed, setting back exploration of our solar system by decades. We can trace so many aspects of our modern world back to that dusty footprint in the Sea of Tranquility. If we lost that spirit of audacious exploration today, what kind of world would we be creating for tomorrow?